Now we go to a series of questions concerning sorcerer. Um, John, who has been discovering these questions textually and playwise for ongoing for a while, rejoins us with another, which is actually a super good question. Probably not the kind of answer that anybody wants to hear, but maybe you do. We'll see. The question is, how does a sorcerer break a binding? There you go. You got a bound demon, and you're like, I want out. I don't want this demon. Or, as he points out, maybe there's sort of a positive thing. It's like, I, son, now, grant unto you this demon to bind, and you have to unbind, for this to happen. Any number of these things. But I want to avoid a certain kind of thinking about these questions, which is very much what I also reject in Champions now, which is the how would you? How would you? Well then, how would you? How do you do that? What if this? I can imagine 17 different. Okay, so this happens. So where's the paragraph? Subsection that nails it. I need to know how. Not really going to happen in a game like this. And not because it's all just GM makes it up for the story or some shit like that. But instead, it's just that the operation of rules is a little different. The most basic answer is that for a sorcerer to break the binding, the answer is already in the text. All but spelled out in red letters. Because just don't feed the thing. Don't grant its need. And either it'll wither up and die, or it will attempt to break the binding. Arguably does some kind of role-playing. Perhaps there is a kind negotiation. Perhaps the two of you have tea and talk it over, whatever. Then we talk about dice bonuses and stuff like that in this, but it is definitely the demon who is breaking the binding in terms of a roll and not you. But you, of course, have, racked it down in some way, perhaps, or just made it incredibly clear that, nope, no more need from me. I'm not fulfilling the need. So no, the sorcerer does not say, you're unbound. Not that easy. Not going to happen. Instead, you can simply cease to commit to the relationship. This is not a healthy relationship. Healthy relationship, you can say bye-bye. Not healthy relationship, my friend. You just cease to commit while the formal commitment is still there. As if, who would imagine such a thing? So anyway, that is the basic answer that is probably not very satisfying. As I said, somewhat positive versions of that without rancor or, crisis, perhaps requiring, later attempts or something like that, if they don't work, could be conceived of. Again, that's where things get real contextual. That's when we look at the statements. That's when we look at the actual actions being taken. That's when we apply the rules and see where they get us. Then John raises a confounding factor, which actually, to me, needs clarification. He says, probably it hasn't come up because it's so easy to banish a bounds demon that you don't want anymore. Hold on here. Banishing a bounds demon does not break the binding. It doesn't. If that thing is resummoned by someone else, it's going to be looking for you for that need. Only you can give it the need. And whoever summoned it is almost certainly not going to have been very successful in doing so, or to have had a very good day, unless they have told this demon, oh, the dude's over there, go get your need now. Demon shows up, says, hungry. So it's almost worse to banish a bounds demon. You don't know when or if that thing will show up on your bedstead, wanting what you have to give it. So I just want to point out that little kind of side note in there went down a not very good rabbit hole. Nope. Close that one up. It's not an interesting rabbit hole that goes cool places with little bunnies. That's a bad rabbit hole. That does not apply. So hopefully that has made some sense. Okay, we're still sticking with Sorcerer questions. And this one's from Sean. And this is actually a very old concern with Sorcerer. In Sorcerer, you have stamina, will, and lore. Also, cover and price, but we'll stick with stamina, will, and lore as relevant to this question. All of those need an in-fiction descriptor, which really, in this game, are replacement terms. I mean, technically speaking, you probably wouldn't be saying my character's stamina. You would be referring to the descriptor as this character's version of stamina. That's kind of what they are. Now, in Sorcerer, the options for each of them are fixed. There's a list, 5 or 6 of them, 5 or 6 terms for stamina, will, and lore. Everybody reading Sorcerer and being addled with notions of it's the freeform game thinks that you get to make up a descriptor for your character's stamina. Yay! Very over the edge, actually. I mean, and fudge and many other things, but the idea being that, you basically get to write all the descriptive terms for your character just out of your fuzzy little head, and that's great. Well, it can be great. It can fit with other games quite nicely. I should point out that both Fudge and Over the Edge are predicated on an extraordinarily clear sense of genre. And that forms a conceptual node in which freely authored descriptors tends to fit in nicely. They also have very strong GM vetting, so the GM can say, no, not that. No, doesn't fit. So Sorcerer takes a different route. In looking across all of the inspirational material, thinking about all of the characters, what I did was effectively say, okay, here's the profile of physicality that works for stories of this kind, works for doing this. And I stated them as generally as I could. And I said, just stay in that, because what really matters, where things explode in this game, is the demonics, is the conceptual, anti-metaphysical, if you will, because it's disruptive, diversity of the game. So I wanted all the stuff about your character's physicality and their personality and the way they think they have contacted into this demon stuff, their own perspective on it, which is what the lore descriptors are. All of those need to stay very stable. And then from there is where the demonic stuff explodes. And I started that way in design. Sean asked me, did you start that way? I mean, was this sort of a given from the start and you just stuck with it? Or did it emerge through playtesting? You realized this worked best? It's actually both. I did start with it this way, and through play of the kind I was talking about, tons of people over a decade, I saw it do what I wanted it to do. I saw it play the role that I knew was what I wanted these descriptors to do. And that Every single time anybody got festive, particularly other groups who just said, oh, we write our own descriptors, right? It's trash. I mean, every single time I saw anybody do that, play just belly flopped. And I can see why. I mean, it's just not the game where you freely, happily, flower child, make up all your descriptors. No, those are super solid for the game. It's the demonics that explode, not those. So that was the logic in the start. It was validated as I went along. Now, Sorcerer and Sword, that's where I said, okay, are the descriptors pretty much the same or are they a little different? They're a little different. So I made them different. In some experimental stuff in Sex and Sorcery, I also said, well, what if love, sex, intimacy, and the various transgressions among those were like incredibly the core of play? Would there be different descriptors? Would it effectively be a hack of Sorcerer? And I did. I said, okay, let's go that far. But it was very much like, let's actually write kind of a game that you could even give a different name, specifically because those descriptors are different. It is that important. With any luck, that answers the question. And I'd love to follow up on that with anything because I like that game. So here's my first shot. May not be successful. I may reshoot for Zhao. By the way, I do rather enjoy the linguistic sweep of Zhao, Sean, and John in this round of questions. If we'd only had, Johan and Yvonne, then we have a global sweep of that name, which would amuse me. Well, so apologies. This question concerns a lot of things, and I have to take it step by step. So reading, it's a page of text for the question, and so is not really going to do us any good if I try to just go through it sequentially. There are several levels. Level number 1, my preferences versus my categorizations. Now, this is the kind of thing that one can't really answer directly. Everybody's going to say that their categorizations are beautifully objective, intellectual, and that their preferences are merely the fluff of their personal preferences. So no matter what I say, someone can say, yeah, right. So go ahead if you want. Nothing I can say about that. I think it's wrong that I'm doing that I'm simply making categories based on preferences I may have, but of course I would say that. Judge for yourself. So, next level, which is to consider this. It's my statement that I do not consider intuitive continuity to be emergent play at the table. This is baffling to a lot of people. Zhao is merely representative of this response of like, what do you mean it's not emergent? It wasn't there, and now it is. But the answer is actually contained in his phrasing, which I think is quite useful, that it cropped up this obviously, which is this. How is this not emergent or story now? The problem about the GM being the sole author of the story is not present, right? And to continue with this part, the question of one person keeping the control of the story changes to situations where several persons, all players, keep control of the story. How is this not emergent or story now? The problem about the GM being the sole author of the story is not present, right? What is hindering emergent play then? Why is it not satisfactory? It's all right there in what you said. Control. This business about the sole author versus a number of different people trading off elements of, trading off being the sole author is missing the point. I don't care if it's one or everybody or some or in what order or whatever. The issue is the behavior, and that behavior is control. Control, in this sense, does not mean simply contributing a thing into play. Control in this sense means that whatever outcomes have occurred so far, you now have basically a reboot and a reassessment and a complete carte blanche to decide how much they matter, to decide whether this is going to happen next or not, to decide without constraint from what has gone before. Now, what has gone before could have been just things that occurred in play. It could be things that you or anyone has held constant as a given. It may be something that was prepared 5 months before. It may be something that was made up in play 5 seconds before, but it is operative on play. It is the way you are playing that it is operative on play. And if you then say, oh, well, it's not, I just have these moments where I can just say, retconning the past into its degrees of impact on the present and looking ahead in the future and thinking about, where I want to go or what will be cool or anything like that. And then saying, oh, well, that's where we're going. That's where it goes. And you are unconstrained. That is control. Again, you're a little hung up on whether one person has it or whether a bunch of people have it and saying, well, isn't it emergent to do that? Because, you did make something up there about what will happen next. So it wasn't there before and it is there now. And that sounds emergent to me. That's not emergent at all. Emergent means comes from things, from something. The known, stuff that is known to be uncertain, stuff that we are working with. What we're talking about here, what control is being free from that. You hover over the fray and you go, how important is what's happened? I'll decide. Where is it going to go from here? I'll decide, because I'm in control. This is not a matter of preference. This is categorization. That's not play. If you are with a group of people and you're doing something fun in a leisurely fashion, and you are also, according to one another, doing it in specific ways, using specific procedures. There are things that people get to do and procedures for what they actually turn into, which are considered by perhaps the naive at the table that they will be what they are, and that they will be treated as having occurred to the impact that they were alleged to have, and are reincorporated with respect for those things. There is a way to play in which you adjudge yourself above all that. You will vet the input from everybody else. You will vet the outcomes of the procedures we use. You will vet the overall importance of everything that has occurred so far relative to the present moment in the array of options, which means you basically make up the current options full cloth. And you are vetting where it's all going. So you are, again, jumping a little ahead in the future and saying, okay, well, we need to get over here. And, oh, by the way, that things you found, that stuff you did, it gives you this. As you adjudge it, now is the time for them to get this. This isn't play. It can't be play. To hover like that, to adjudge like that, to adjust, to decide, to direct, and to reinterpret for everyone what has been. An analogy may be, should we be playing a game of cards that, in the midst somebody plays, a card into the pool there, of the cards that are being compared, and somebody says, as is their God-given right, as they have stated, that I am not a player, I am the game master. And I have decided that card being played right then isn't as fun for everybody as this other card. So I will consider this card that you just played to be a different card. And that's what the outcome will look like. And that's what the scoring will look like. And that's what happened. Now, this sounds impossible in a card game. It is impossible. Just because you're the dealer doesn't mean you get to do that. And it is impossible in role-playing. It turns role-playing into a completely different phenomena that is not play. And it should not be mistaken with differences in authorities about who does get to say what is happening or how it turns out this time about what in this particular moment. If it is, for example, my job to say where the camera comes up in the next scene, now we are in this clearing and, Bob, you're sitting there, bathing yourself in the lovely freshwater spring, and the unicorn, wanders up to you and gazes soulfully into your eyes. If it's my job to say stuff like that, then it's my job. The question is, what constraints am I operating under? Both conceptual, fictionally, procedurally, whatever those constraints are that I have adopted. They might be in a text, or they might be stuff that we have sort of tweaked out, from interacting with a text or whatever. Could be scattered notes of a game half in design, wherever they come from. But those constraints are operative. Control means not being subject to any such thing. And that is the feature of emergent continuity. Intuitive continuity. That is the feature of intuitive continuity, where you, tap dancing ahead of the players, are unconstrained and completely retcon everything as you see fit. That, they by the way, under the bar, that bag you got from under the bar, it has this in it. And you've got, so one eye on the past, retconning everything to fit into where you want it to go into the future. And they can do God knows what. And you're in control. It's not play. Can't be. So this, I think, leads to a certain amount of confusion about words like power, which I don't use. You may have noticed. I hope that I do not talk about game master power and player power. There was some talk of balance of power way back in the Forge before the language of authorities got formed. It's gone. We are not talking about power. We are talking about division of labor. We are talking about who has authoritative stamp on what gets contributed into play. And a couple of things. Authoritative stamp does not mean everyone shut up while I make shit up. It means a lot of different ways to know what then gets incorporated by anyone else. So it can be subject to immense procedural constraint, or it may be that it is bounded in time about a certain thing and has no particular constraints on content right there, but it is bounded in time in particular ways and scopes. All sorts of different ways to structure authority about different things. None of which entail that overall look at play and saying, okay, I can change up anything I want in terms of importance and effect about how it's gone and where it's going to go. With any luck, that answers what you were asking about. I think it's exposed topics that we should have dialogue about. Your secondary questions about, why no bangs and circle of hands and any number of things like that. What you call successful play of Call of Cthulhu scenarios, which I say they may be successful, but they're not play. They are performances, interactive performances of dinner theater, which is I suppose, a good thing, but what does that have to do with, anything? With any luck, we should continue with this in direct dialogue. I hope this has formed some basis for doing so.